The time has come to summon the Vampire Council. Welcome, everyone. Happy World Dracula Day. In honor of the second most important undead day of the year, I have gotten together a group of people who are all hosts of vampire shows on the internet. And I am really nerding out right now because several of us have never met one another before this very moment. So before we get into the topic of this Vampire Symposium, let me go through real quick and just ask each of these esteemed guests to tell us who they are and tell us what it is that they do. Let's start with Dan.
Dan Klefstad. I am an author, book publicist, and co-host of Vamp Chat with Dan and Eva, with Eva Vertrice, who is also on this line. The vampire novel that I wrote is called Fiona's Guardians.
Excellent. Well, let's just run straight into Eva then. Go ahead.
I'm Eva Vertrice, co-host of Vamp Chat with Dan and Eva. I am also an author. I have a trilogy. Book 1 of Fury's out. Book 2 is coming out.
That's excellent. Next, Elisa.
I'm Elisa Hansen. I host Maven of the Eventide, a YouTube channel that's been around since 2011, where I analyze vampire media and how the vampires in media and pop culture serve as social metaphors for the human condition. And I am also an author of vampire fiction. My book is The Company of Death.
Excellent. And Brian?
Oh, hi, I'm Brian. I exist as Toothpickings on the internet, usually at YouTube and various other social media places. I kind of work around the crossroads of vampire folklore, fiction, and pop culture. I've written a little bit. Some stuff has been published in some journals, and I've never finished writing a book. So I'm quite in awe of all the other guests who have and gotten all the way to the end. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We look forward to you joining us.
Someday I'll get to be in the club and I'll get the signet ring and everything.
Wait,
Oh,
we get
yes,
rings?
the signet ring is nice. I'm looking forward to that one myself. Okay, so that is our panel today for this Vampire Symposium. And like I say, none of us have really ever talked in the same space before, but all of us have interviewed a lot of people, and we have done a lot of research for various videos and podcast episodes, all based on vampires. So I thought, what better group of people to get together to discuss and really get sort of into the weeds on a bit of an advanced pop culture topic here. This Vampire Symposium is going to be less like the modern usage of the term, which is sort of like a scholarly assembly, and more like the old Greek use, which is basically a bunch of folks who are sitting around having a conversation about a topic very informally. So this will just be open to whomever wants to say what, when, feel free. And our topic is Twilight the reason why we got Robert Eggers' NOSFERATU? Panel, what do you think?
I have a TLDR answer, which is probably.
Yes, panel.
Is that it? Can we go home?
Great meeting, guys.
Yes. No, with an asterisk. And the
Absolutely.
asterisk is a very long asterisk, which takes us back to the ancient Greek, which is very apt for your symposium.
Wonderful.
Tell me more about
by
that
all
asterisk.
means.
Because we're talking about the death and the maiden archetype, which has been a popular storytelling thing for audiences. And when I say audiences, I mean young ladies, for a very long time. And when you're talking about the popularity of the new NOSFERATU remake, and when you say why we got it, are you talking about why Robert Eggers, a young man who happens to be exactly my age, made it? Are you talking about why the Hollywood studio system allowed him to make it? Or are you talking about why the audience response was as wild as it was, which consisted mostly of ladies. Like, why did the ladies go wild for NOSFERATU? This hideous, hideous creature having this very erotic relationship with a lady. And you've got your classic Death and the Maiden romance archetype, which goes all the way back to Hades and Persephone.
Could you, and I was going to say, could you please explain to those folks who are maybe not familiar with the Death and the Maiden exactly the archetype? Or maybe you were about to do that and I just cut you off.
So Hades, the Greek god of death, fell in love with Persephone, the young virginal goddess of springtime, his absolute complete opposite. He absconded with her into his dark world of death and decay, where she, this springtime flower, happy girl, seems like she couldn't be more possibly not right for. And yet she became the queen of this realm, the dread Persephone, and according to many versions of this myth, actually fell in love with him and wound up in a happy marriage. He is one of the only Greek gods that is known for being faithful to his wife, for the most part, compared to all the other Greek gods, which were known for being billy goats, and with very unhappy marriages. They had a happy marriage, you know, for most of the myths. There's some caveats there. And girls love this. Like, in my generation growing up, we didn't have Twilight. We had the Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom of the Opera was my generation's Death and the Maiden. We're going to eroticize this horrible gremlin, hideous monster man, and the sweet, innocent, pure, virginal maiden. And we're going to find it very sexy when this vampiric creature, you know, the Phantom's not a vampire, Hades is not a vampire, but the vampire is the embodiment of death. And if you look at NOSFERATU, she talks about her dream wedding being to death himself. You know, she's thinking of NOSFERATU, but she, in her dreams, he is death himself. He is the embodiment of death. And that wedding to death. And when I say Robert Eggers is exactly my age, I have to wonder, was he a Phantom of the Opera kid?
Ooh.
So
we'll
maybe,
have to ask him.
maybe he wasn't, maybe there was nothing to Twilight to do there. But, you know, he could have been brought to make NOSFERATU from the same reason I came to love vampires, through Phantom of the Opera, through the Death and the Maiden love, could have brought him to that very same place. But would he have been allowed to do it without the popularity of Twilight, without that generation that was between mine, and the current generation, with that Twilight generation in the middle there that allowed the studios to be like, all right, there's money in this, we can allow this person to make this. So, you know, here, go ahead, make this.
Now, this is for Maven and for the group, of course, but I just help me understand something. Well, how does with the death in the death of the maiden myth? How does that revert back to Twilight? How does Twilight fit into that?
Any vampire human romance where the vampire is this dark, mysterious, murderous monster, immortal creature who cannot die, unbound by death, the embodiment of death, and free of death, and a human mortal maiden is a Death and the Maiden story. Twilight is a very sanitized Death and the Maiden. It's very baby's first Death and the Maiden. But that's why when young girls of that generation discovered Twilight, it was like crack to them, because it had all the things going for it. The Beauty and the Beast story, the Death and the Maiden story of this monstrous, horrible, all-powerful entity of death that could destroy anything is in love with me? And I have this almighty being whipped, and he's my monster, and I'm his special someone? And, you know, he could just like slaughter this entire room, but no, with me, he's soft and gentle and he loves me. You know, I wouldn't say that's how NOSFERATU is with Ellen in the movie, like, but she is his special someone. So that element of the eroticism of the, like, he may be a monster, but he's my monster is still there. And yes, Twilight is a very soft version of that. Edward is a very gentle embodiment of death, but he still is that by his very nature of being a vampire.
The first thing that started creeping in my mind when you started down this track, Elise, was how so many of these stories, especially the early ones, were authored by men. But then I had to check myself because it's like, well, Stephanie Meyer clearly is not. And so many of the vampire monster loving stories that maybe don't rise to the success of Twilight or NOSFERATU are also authored by women. So it seems to kind of cut across all genders who like this story and like to create the story and enjoy the story.
It's an extremely good point. I was having this thought yesterday. You look at the original Phantom of the Opera written by Gaston Leroux, a man, and that novel, you know, it was a gothic romance, and all gothic romances are inherently erotic just by their very nature. But then you look at Andrew Lloyd Webber, who took that gothic novel and made it so much more romantic. His musical version is extremely romantic compared to the book. You look back at the book and you're like, this reads like a detective story. Where's like all the like seduction and stuff? That's not even in the book. But Andrew Lloyd Webber, a man, made it that way.
Well, there was the film in between those two, though. There was
also made by men.
Right.
I mean, there were many films in between those two.
No, I just mean that the film in between those two bridges that romance, because I see the film as being a bit more romantic than
the Carl Laemmle film?
But maybe not so much the musical. Less so than the musical, I mean.
The Carl Laemmle film with Lon Chaney?
Yes.
Because there was also the one with Claude Rains where they took the romance out of it entirely and he became her father.
I did not see that one. I'm not actually familiar with that one at all. I was thinking about the Lon Chaney one.
I've never heard of that one either.
Really?
He was essentially invisible during that, wasn't he?
No. It's a huge, like, musical. It's a Universal Studios musical. It's huge. But we're getting off topic here. I could talk about Phantom of the Opera forever. But yeah. But anyway, all those movies were made by men. I know plenty of men who are like Phantom of the Opera. They identify with him. They're like, I too am sad and lonely and, you know, feel like a monster because nobody loves me. But it's the women who find it especially romantic and erotic and see that romance and be like, oh, the Phantom, oh, Nosferatu, you know, I wish I had an Edward. And, you know, the Twilight audience got a very handsome death embodiment. You know, they got their sexy looking death. But when we come to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, he did not make him pretty. Andrew Lloyd Webber took the Phantom from the book, who was like a walking corpse looking guy, and made him pretty sexy looking. You know, he has his deformity, but otherwise he's in a tuxedo, he's suave, you know, he made him look good. But now we've come all the way back full circle to a hideous, wheezing, mustached monster man.
Finally.
Yes, and we're allowed to have it, and women still find it extremely erotic and hot and are into it, which I think, like, before this time, people were kind of afraid to go there, be like, no, we can't put that in a movie because they won't find it hot. So we have to give the Phantom as small of a deformity as possible. Otherwise, the audiences won't be into it. Like, no, honey. No, trust your audience. Look.
There's definitely a divide, though, right? There's plenty of people who were repulsed by Orlock in Eggers' film, but there's a shocking number who are not, who are very into it.
I felt brutally attacked by that mustache throughout the entire film.
You know, there's something that occurred to me about the audience that initially read the books, the Twilight books, and then saw the movies beginning in 2005, I think. And then this same audience growing older a little bit, and did this kind of, you know, put them in the right time or position to appreciate or to view Nosferatu as an erotic figure? I guess that's kind of curious for me.
I wonder if it's the same audience at all.
You think it might be different?
Yeah, I mean, if the Twilight-loving audience likes the pretty boys, they might not like Nosferatu at all. Look at how many different kinds of vampire romance novels, movies there are out there where the vampire romantic interest for the human or whatever she is main female character has a different kind of aspect to him. A lot of times he will be kind of hunky because that's how romance novels are, but in plenty of other times he is more monstrous.
Twilight kind of emerged. It didn't have a precedent, whereas the Robert Eggers Nosferatu is preceded by at least two that I've seen, the other versions of this film, the 1922 and then the 1979, starring Klaus Kinski, who was moderately grotesque. But still also an attractive, positioned as an attractive erotic creature. It's interesting that Twilight, started. Yes, there's a Death in the Maiden myth before that, but it's interesting how Twilight sort of just emerged and attracted such an audience right away.
Well, Twilight also was going off of a very popular romance trope called Hate at First Sight, which is most popularly known through Pride and Prejudice, which is one of the most popular romance novels in the history of ever. And it compares itself to Pride and Prejudice quite deliberately. So it had the formula down to be crack for teen girls.
I don't think I've heard the phrase "hate at first sight." I like that.
And to that note, I mean, when I first heard the topic, I 100% agree with Death in the Maiden. I looked at it a little bit differently. I looked at it as, here you have the version of the vampire. And you've got the olders. It was a more grotesque-ish creature with Nosferatu, and then it sort of came up, and then it took like this turn, and it became Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Twilight, all of the kind of cleansed
True Blood
of the vampire. And so, the question then in my head to this topic was, okay, so it came up this way and then it went over here. And now what I'm seeing is it going back this way. And so the question is, you've got Demeter, you've got Nosferatu Sinners that just came out, which I'm dying to see. So you have this more, we're veering back to the grotesque. And so, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, was this because it went over to this cleansed version that kind of the true vampire fans, I agree that Twilight 100% opened the door for the money machine that is the studios. Did that allow for us to go back to that more harsher, uglier version that it originally was? I was thinking kind of, or did it just kind of bifurcate and we're still going to get the pretty with the ugly?
I have a philosophy theory. I don't know what the right word is. After Twilight came out, we have gotten exactly two kinds of vampire movies ever since. Ones that are trying to ride Twilight's coattails and be similar in order to make the money that Twilight made, and ones that are trying to be as different as possible from Twilight, because Twilight vampires aren't real vampires. Let me show you real vampires. And that's every single other kind of vampire movie that you're talking about right now. Because Twilight offended a lot of vampire fans who have very specific ideas about what they think vampires are, which Twilight didn't meet.
And is this a rebuttal to that?
I would just argue that divide already existed. We already had Salem's Lot and Dracula and the Anne Rice verse existing before Twilight. So we had a pretty vampire track and a horrible vampire track already. I agree with you, though.
Of those.
I agree with you that post-Twilight, vampires are defined against Twilight quite heavily, but that divide existed before. It wasn't defined as being we're not going to be like Twilight vampires. Instead, we're not going to be Dracula vampires.
None of those was it about the girl falling in love with the vampires. Like, you had a few versions of Dracula that became romantic versions where we're like, what if Dracula was romantic after all? But that was pretty much just him.
I would say almost every version of Dracula, right? Every filmed version of Dracula.
There was the Frank Langella one.
Yeah.
And then Bram Stoker's Dracula. And that one BBC miniseries kind of went there. But it was really the Bram Stoker's Dracula after that. Then it was every version. Mm. That was the one that really turned the tide. And that, I think, is a lot more responsible for this Nosferatu movie going in that direction than Twilight.
Well, the woman I met who had a tattoo of Frank Langella on her arm and said, "I became a woman watching that movie," would argue that that's where it started becoming romantic.
Well, everyone forgets about Frank Langella, and they just look at Bram Stoker's Dracula and blame that. But Frank Langella is like, it did it, but pop culture didn't cling to it and make a thing out of it. Like, it didn't get the credit. But you look at Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire, very pretty vampires, but very gay. So you don't have that romance with women in it at all.
No, and I wouldn't argue that. I just argue the pretty vampires versus the horrible to look at vampires was a divide that we had existing before Twilight. I think Twilight became an easy target to either replicate or define yourself against. But we had that difference
mean so
before.
much the way they look, but the way they behave, the way Edward's like, oh, I don't feed off humans. I only eat animals. Versus, I love being a vampire. I'm going to go vampire it up all the way. The self-loathing vampire versus the happy vampire, or the indulgent vampire.
Sure.
But one thing that I wanted to mention about the Maiden in these Death and the Maiden stories that Robert Eggers' Nosferatu really brought out was that the maiden isn't just a sweet, innocent maiden who gets drawn into darkness. She feels darkness inside herself as well. She's not a regular girl. There's something dark about her to begin with. So you look at Ellen and Nosferatu, and he's like, it's not me, it's the darkness in yourself. What's going on with you is already there in you. You're already like weird. And you look at Christine in Phantom of the Opera, she already has a dark soul. That's why the Phantom is attracted to her. She already has this darkness in her. And you go back to Persephone, like, why did she wind up being such a good queen of the dead? Like, she took to it. She did fall in love with Hades. So when you're looking at the kind of girls that do really fall for this trope, you're looking at little goth girls. You're looking at girls that have a darkness in them that really are into this. And the more a girl, a teenage girl or a young lady or even an older woman is going to really cling to a story like this, the more like goth she is, probably the darker she's going to go with her version. So the less goth ones are going to like the ones like Twilight, right? Bella was weird. She wasn't a normal kid. She was different. She didn't fit in. So she does have a little bit of darkness to her, right? Like but Ellen, way more goth. So you got the much more goth girls are going to be into something like Nosferatu and much more accepting of a much more hideous monster.
And it's also important to remember that, Ellen Hutter summons this demon, the vampire, Nosferatu, which is a nice, how do I say this? We see a little bit of that in the 1979 Dracula, when Kate Nelligan's Lucy, catches Dracula's attention by saying, "I love to be frightened," during that one dinner scene. And that's when he really notices her, because she's got a dark side. So it's we see a ramp up to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu starting in 1979, I think.
Yeah, and in 1931, the Lucy character, she was kind of brazen about it too. Yeah. She was just like, why should we be like, sheltered? Are any of you familiar with Nosferatu the musical?
I've heard of it.
It never got produced, right? It was something that was going to happen, and some songs were written for it, and then it never.
An entire album's written for it. You can listen to the whole thing, and the entire musical's sung through. So if you listen to the whole thing, you've basically seen the entire musical blind. So I have, and the interesting thing about that is that she, at the end, when she's come to the choice of like, oh, I have to sacrifice myself to be with him in order to save everyone, she's also basically fallen in love with him. It's much more romantic in the musical. And she's not actually giving up her life in the musical. It's not really that he's going to kill her. It's that she has to have sex with him, and therefore she's cheating on her husband, and that is a hard choice she has to make. But she decides to do it, and she actually lives at the end of the musical, which
Interesting.
reminded me a lot more of the Dracula versions. And if you are familiar with the Dracula musical by Frank Wildhorn, it has a very similar ending where when Jonathan sings the song about like, how can I rip off a butterfly's wings, because he recognizes that Dracula and Mina are actually in love, and like, how could I come between such a pure and perfect love? Like, people are shipping Mina and Dracula by this point. Like, even Jonathan ships it. Like, what's going on here? Like, this idea in our society that we've come to this point that we're like, yes, of course Dracula and Mina should be together, obviously. Like, we're writing musicals about it where we've decided that this is the pure true love. So when I saw in Robert Eggers' Nosferatu that she is drawn to him so much more than she was in 1922, where she's just grossed out by him and terrified by him, that is sort of a given now, just in our society. Is like, that's what interests me. Like, how did we come to that? Because in Twilight, Bella is immediately attracted to him, even though in the schools, like, yes, of course, he's the hottest guy in school. Everyone's into him. And she's like, well, I'm not going to be. And then she immediately is. Like, why is it always immediately a given? Like, do they know they're in a romance novel? Like,
let me
maybe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
Ron.
I was going to try to give an answer to that is a bastardization of the original question you started us with, Sean. Instead of asking, is Twilight the reason we got Nosferatu? Is Nosferatu the reason we got Twilight? Because as those of you who we've all read the original Dracula, there's no romance between Dracula and any other characters in the novel. But when they make the 1922 Nosferatu, there is this toxic romance that exists. It's not as heavy-handed as later films, but it's there. And then that, just like Nosferatu influencing the sun as being a danger to vampires, influences later vampire stories, especially later Dracula stories. So maybe 1922's Nosferatu influenced by a very, very long shot Twilight, which then created another feedback loop for us.
Stephanie Meyer claims that she never read any vampire books. She wasn't influenced by anything vampire, but that was in her, this osmosis of this idea of course, there's this romance there. That's just how it goes, because that trope is just so prevalent in what people like.
Yeah, it's been done so much, especially in vampire fiction, that people would argue strongly that there's romance in the original novel when there's not. So yeah, I can see where that would seep in if you had never really sat down and read vampire novels or watched that many vampire movies. You would just accept that that is part of every vampire story.
I have this playbill from the Dracula musical when it was on Broadway, and it has an interview with the actress who's playing Mina. And she's talking about how sexy the original Dracula book is. And she's like, open up to this page in this paragraph where Jonathan's sleeping in bed beside her and Dracula's forcing her to drink from his chest. And oh my God, that's the most romantic thing ever written. I'm like, did we read the same book? Like, really? Like, this actress who's just playing this role on Broadway, like, it's just like a given to her. Like, that's just what she thought.
Right.
I remember that was one of my biggest things, is I've read the book like, oh my God, 10 times. And, you know, I'm sitting there and I watched the first time I watched the movie, I was like, wait a minute, did I miss something here?
Let me ask you guys this, because we're talking about the character of Ellen, and in the original 1922 version, even though you could argue that Ellen is the main character of the movie, but Ellen does not have a relationship so much with Count Orlock until the very end of the movie. So Orlock starts technically stalking her at the time that he sees her locket when Jonathan Hutter brings it to his castle. But Ellen is not aware of any infatuation until at the very end, Orlock sees her through the window. So that to say that Ellen's participation in the relationship is a very, very small part at the end of that movie. Whereas in this most recent version, she is the catalyst for it and starts at the very beginning being the active participant in the relationship that carries all the way through the movie. Do we think maybe that has been informed by Twilight at all?
So we've been informed by the 1979 Nosferatu. Isabella Gianni and Klaus Kinski meet once before, like maybe the night before he finally moves in to drink her blood, and she sacrifices herself to him. So this occurs in her bathroom or somewhere in the house where she's staying, and we see this meeting between the two, and he declares his the loneliness he feels, and he needs to be completed, and she would complete him, paraphrasing of course here. So we see that first. I think we get a next step, if you will, toward the Robert Eggers Nosferatu in the 79 version.
You see a lot of vampire soulmates coming along, starting in like the 60s, where it's not just a vampire stalking a random maiden. They are soulmates. They are fated. You see Barnabas Collins with his reincarnated lost love, then you see that one mini series version of Dracula where she's the reincarnation of his dead wife, and then Bram Stoker's Dracula did the same thing where she was Elisabetta reincarnated, and I feel like this is going along in that same thing. Like they are some kind of destined to be soulmates. When she called forth for an angel, he was the soul that responded to her, because it's not just, hey, I saw your locket and you've got a beautiful bosom and I want you. We're bonded. There's more to it than that. It's cosmic. It's meant to be. This is deeper than that. And with Twilight, it's kind of the same thing. Like their powers, because in Twilight, each vampire has a special power, one single power. Edward's is that he can read minds. Bella's is that she's a shield and she can block things. And when she's the only person whose mind he can't read, he's instantly like fascinated with her. And she also is fascinated with him. She starts researching him. She starts kind of stalking him. He's stalking her. And so she does kind of catalyze it a little bit in that she's not just like, hey, leave me alone, go away. She is actively trying to pursue him, and he's like, we can't be friends, stay away from me, I'm bad for you. But she won't let him go, even though he's trying to do the right thing. So a little bit, maybe, like her power called to his power, in a sense. We find out like in the very last books. I don't know if it's soulmates as much, but there's a bit of it there.
Well, and it could just be that female character participation in stories has come a long way in the last 100 years. That could also be the case, but
yeah.
I liked. I'll get away from maybe some of the broader context of it. I just liked that they introduced that into the most recent Nosferatu, because it made Ellen more active in the story, and it solved a plot problem that always bothered me in a lot of these Nosferatu and Dracula stories, which is, why is he coming all the way to England to stalk one individual person? This gave it a reason to happen.
And in the sort of the original spirit of the question, the fact that this particular love affair is less the romantic, guy in a tuxedo coming in and, sweeping a girl off her feet with all of his money and handsomeness and all that sort of thing. And instead is essentially a predatory ex-boyfriend who is showing up to wreck the life that the girl put together, in order to escape him, may be more of a bleaker response to the vitriol of, teenagers falling in love and sparkling, Dracula suddenly having a romance that was never in the book. Do you think perhaps that might be the case?
That it's a more responsible movie, like a more...
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should say in response to, like, for, I have in mind...
when I say responsible, I mean like the message is more responsible. Like this is more realistic. Like as a person who's delivering a message to people, I'm delivering a more responsible, sophisticated message with better nuance. That's what I mean.
Could be more of a. I think as due to social media and the absolute reality television, things like that, where we as an audience are much more comfortable and familiar with watching the stories of real life people and consuming true crime and all of that type of thing, where we are observing the sort of the worst qualities of people, which were not talked about, were not in books, they were not in popular culture as much before. I guess I don't know if my thesis is that Nosferatu is the vampire movie of the social media generation as a response to that, but I couldn't see the idea of an asshole ex-husband as a vampire coming back to get his wife Fargo style prior to the last 10 years. That would not have occurred to me as something that would show up in a vampire movie.
Well, this is a horror movie, and Twilight is not.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
When was the Dracula Untold? When did that come out? Because that
2014.
That has a very that's very much along the lines of at the very end, they had just it's chance. He didn't hunt her down. It just happened. So that's
true.
That was more of I liked that movie because it was more realistic. There was this thing that happened. It happened in history, and then he just happened upon her at a farmer's market in front of a flower vendor.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, guys, unless anyone has any further comments to make about this subject, we do have a little time left. I would really love to ask you guys another question and see what you think about that.
I want to ask, can I ask one question on this topic to
please.
The group? There were a couple other films of Nosferatu that came out in 2024 that I did not see. Both, I think the other people in this group are more prolific consumers of vampire movies than I am. I wonder, did you see them, and how do they stack up? How do they compare? Would they be a part of this conversation, or are they sort of outside of this question that Sean posed at the beginning?
What films are you talking about?
Yeah, if we don't know the films, then there's no way to compare, because
that answers that
the
question. I suppose that other people on this call had seen these other Nosferatu films that came out in 2024.
I'm aware of a Nosferatu that came out in 2023, and I'm not even. It may not be a U.S. production, so I'm going to have to do a little research on that one before I can even comment.
There was one that kept being said it was going to be made, and then it got canned, and then it said it was going to be made, and then it got canned. Did that actually wind up getting made?
I don't think so.
I believe there was one. Aware. There was one where Doug Jones played Orlock within the last couple of years, and if I'm remembering correctly, and please in the comments correct me on this, but I think that the sort of the premise behind the making of the movie was that all of the backgrounds were going to be essentially taken from the original film, the 1922 film, and like rear projected or something like that, so that the locations and the texture of it all felt the same, but with new actors playing it out.
Now, see, if I had known that, I would have rushed out to see it. I like that idea.
Yeah, I saw an article on it, but I haven't seen it.
Well, and certainly something that I look forward to and will never see is that it seems about every 40 years or so Nosferatu gets remade. And it would be interesting to see 40 years from now what Nosferatu.
The thing about Nosferatu is it's public domain, so you can remake it for free, and you don't have to pay any licensing fees. So that's the reason for that. That's also why, Phantom of the Opera keeps getting remade and stuff. Meanwhile, like Universal does still hold the rights to the original Wolfman and all those other ones,
Well, Dracula's in the public domain, though, is Frankenstein.
Now, that just came in, didn't it?
No,
just a few
that was
years ago?
62. Dracula as a character became public domain.
Well,
in
yeah, as a character.
1962.
I mean the Universal, the script that they used
sure.
for that movie.
Yeah. Their version of it.
Yeah, which I don't like anyway, because it changes Lucy and Mina around. Why would you do that?
Well, actually, the play did the
Yeah, because it's the same exact
Hamilton
script.
Dean, right? Yeah,
Yeah, the movie is the Hamilton Dean play.
I did like how they combined Renfield and Harker in that early movie, the 31 movie. I thought that made sense for the economy of what they were doing on stage, because otherwise Renfield's such a cool character, but what's he doing there? But if you have Harker turn into Renfield, I thought that was a nice touch for having to condense such a big story. Sorry to get off topic.
No, that's okay.
We
This
never,
is a vampire symposium.
We never really
after
addressed
all,
the fact for the uninitiated, and there's got to be some people out there who don't realize that the original Nosferatu was a unlicensed adaptation of Dracula. So maybe we should have set that bounds right at the very start of this conversation, because there might be someone here who doesn't realize that.
Yeah, Ellen is Mina,
Yeah.
Anne is Lucy. Pretty vampires versus ugly vampires. So, Dracula in the book, he's not particularly handsome or anything, but he just looks like a guy. Like, when he moves in, he looks like a neighbor. And in the movie with Bela Lugosi, he just looks like a neighbor. He's sophisticated, he's foreign, he's a little bit creepy, but that's just because, he's foreign. But in Nosferatu, he looks like a monster. He does not look human. And that was something that the movie did entirely of its own creativity. And then you look at the movie version of Salem's Lot, right? In the book, in Salem's Lot, he's just a neighbor. He looks just like a guy moving in, and he's actually kind of suave and sophisticated. And that, as a vampire, is how he lures people in, and that's what makes him scary. But the movie, when they were making that movie, they're like, no, that's not going to scare people in a movie. We got to make him look like Nosferatu. So they borrowed from that Nosferatu look specifically and made the vampire in Salem's Lot, look like Nosferatu. And so when you're looking at cinema as a form of media compared to book as a form of gothic horror, where, oh no, the person that you thought was just your nice normal neighbor turned out to be a monster, versus visual horrors. So when you have Twilight, where you have the vampire who's like, oh, I am made to lure you in. I'm especially beautiful specifically as a lure, because as a monster, that's how I hunt. That's the opposite of Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point.
One of the hallmarks of cinema vampires is that they're the one monster that can get really close to you without you realizing that you're in danger till it's too late.
Well, that's the hallmark of literary vampires. Like with cinema vampires, we've got some really creepy looking things that are almost more like zombies a lot of the time.
Okay, I will accept that correction, because the second part of what I was going to say is there's a Salem's Lot version that has a neighborly Barlow.
That's how Stephen King meant it to be, because he was supposed to be Dracula. It was his version of Dracula. He wanted it to be that way.
But which one shows up on GIFs the most? It's the horrible one. That's the one that seemed to resonate more.
Mm-hmm.
Because, cinema as a form of media is about that visual, visceral feeling that it gives you, as opposed to the cerebral horror of, your neighbor betraying you.
Yeah, you can't forget Jerry Dandridge in Fright Night.
Oh, that's a good,
Friendly neighborhood vampire?
Friendly neighborhood vampire, for sure. That's a good point.
Charlie.
Well, and I should probably mention that if anyone watching this wants any information on the original 1922 Nosferatu, every single person in this conversation, I think, has done an episode on that. So just pick your favorite. I've learned stuff from each of these guys on about Nosferatu. Since it is World Dracula Day, let me ask you guys this question. We have talked about today numerous different versions of Dracula that has appeared on film and NBC. And, but for this current generation, the teenagers, the 20-somethings who went and saw Nosferatu this last Christmas, they have yet to have a generational touchstone actor portray Count Dracula the way we did with Gary Oldman, the way our parents did with Frank Langella or Christopher Lee, the way our grandparents did with Bela Lugosi. I guess my question is, the one thing that this generation has that the previous ones did not was instantaneous access to any of those versions to watch whenever they want. So, do you think we will have another actor within the next 10 years really take that role and run with it in an iconic way that a new generation will associate that actor with Dracula?
I think Keanu Reeves is trying to, with his the upcoming Dracula with Jenna Ortega playing the lead female. I think he's trying, and of course he has some work to do because he's got to make up for a lot of a really bad English accent in the 1992 Dracula when he played Jonathan Harker. So I assume many people of all generations are kind of curious to see what Keanu Reeves is going to do with this latest Dracula. My hopes aren't terribly high, but I want to be surprised.
You know what I'm afraid of? Mm-hmm. That it's Adam Sandler in the Hotel Transylvania franchise.
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah, you're right. It may have already been established, and it might be that one. I hadn't considered the cartoon version.
That's interesting. Huh.
But there will certainly be more Draculas. I mean, even after Keanu. But Keanu...
if that was for Generation... Z, then Generation Alpha is like my children's age. She's 6 years old. She, Hotel Transylvania is before her time. So something new, right?
Maybe we can get a Nosferatu version of Banicula before we all die.
Banatu.
Awesome. Yeah.
A creepy version of Banicula. I'd go for that.
What I'm afraid of is that, I look at my nephews and 12 and 8 and, the YouTube generation. And, I look at what they're watching, between the TikTok 30-second, it's going to be interesting to see how the vampire evolves with the new generation, because they are, it's YouTube. It's all, it's the YouTube generation. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what tropes. Dan and I are always curious and love tropes. That's like our thing. We love to see the different tropes that have evolved and are evolving. So it's going to be interesting to see what tropes come out of it.
I'm hoping for the picking up the tacks on the ground, obsessively counting them. I just count that. There's just comedy gold in there, and maybe even horror gold as well in there. We'll see.
I'd be excited.
But I do think
there was a YouTube version of Carmilla that came off pretty well.
Yeah.
And how many times can we make the same gothic Dracula? Why not try a Gen Alpha version of Dracula that would be a TikTok video? Maybe there's something there. The first time it might be bad, but maybe in the hands of the right creator, it'd be pretty good.
Did you see Dracula, a comedy of terrors, when it was on Broadway, or it's in London now?
No.
Now that was a good version of Dracula. That would there's ads for it on TikTok, which is why it made me just go look at the preview ad for it on TikTok. That is a TikTok version of Dracula. It is hilarious.
All right.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the movie producers are going to have a really hard time with reaching the alphas. Even now, you look at the movies that are coming out, and a lot of them are remakes hitting boomers. Remakes of shows that are attracting boomers to the theaters because they haven't figured out how to tap into that YouTube generation and the TikTok generation. I think you're going to see it's going to be curious to see how it evolves.
But there's also been so many remakes of so many things, like layers upon layers. You're talking about who's our generation's Dracula. How many different Batmans have we had over the past 10 years? Like, we don't have this generation's Batman.
That's
We
valid.
have
Spider-Man.
we have like a handful of Batmans, you know, like who
That's
even
valid.
is Superman anymore? Like at this point, there's so many different ones. So I think like the era of having the one defining actor being the guy, maybe that era is over.
We're literally
That's
back to
interesting.
15 minutes of fame.
I would love to see the Spider-Verse version of Dracula, and bring back.
That'd be wonderful.
Well, guys, that was fantastic. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for bringing all of your different sort of research backgrounds and personalities and understanding of this material together for this Vampire Symposium. It was a dream come true to just watch this all unfold before my eyes. So thank you very much for giving us this hour. Before we head out, where can people find you guys? And this is wonderful because it's not like, you know, oh, I just you can find me on Twitter. No, everyone here has a show. So please, let's start with Dan and Eva, and if you guys could tell us where people can find you and what your books are about at the same time.
Want to go first, Eva?
Sure. So you can find us at Vamp Chat with Dan and Eva. We are on Podbean. That's where you can stream live and hear us, but we're on all of the channels, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, everything. We also have a new website, vampchatwithdanandeva.com, as well as you can Gmail us at vampchatwithdanandeva. Everything's Vamp Chat with Dan and Eva. We'll be appearing at the Louisville HorrorCon in June. July will be the Imaginarium. In September, it's the Kentucky Horror Fest. So we're reachable in person. As far as me, you can reach me at evavertrice.com. I've got my book, A Fury, which is out now, and A Hellish Fury is coming out later this year. So, did I miss anything, Dan?
No, I think you covered the waterfront there. You can find me at danklefstad.com, and that's where you can find more information about Fiona's Guardians. You can also find me at DIYbookpromo.com, where I talk about, encouraging people to do their own promotion. But lately, I've been getting folks asking me to promote their books for them. So that's an evolving thing. That's an evolving side of yours truly.
Excellent.
Let's talk about that sometime, Dan. One of these days, hopefully.
Yeah.
Brian, you can find me at Toothpickings. Usually my place that I hang out the most is on YouTube. It's hasn't been quite as regular output lately as I've been working on some writings. My most recent paper was in the Transylvanian University Bulletin of Brasov. It's available for free. You don't even have to buy the whole book. It's called Blood Ties, the intertwined first mentions of vampires in fiction and poetry. I probably just said my own title wrong, but it was something along those lines. And I show up at the occasional convention and do panels or presentations on vampire-related topics. And once in a while, Sean and I get to interact on a channel like this, which is always brilliant.
You did mention Transylvania University. That's in Lexington, Kentucky, as I recall.
There is one in Kentucky. This one is the one that's in Romania.
Okay, sorry. Okay. The original. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
University of Transylvania at Brasov is the one that just published a journal.
All right. Okay.
All right. And Elisa.
You can find me on YouTube. My channel is Maven of the Eventide, but if that's a lot to remember, you can just search for Vampire Reviews. I'm the first thing that comes up. I am also on all the social medias as Elisa in Time or Elisa Hansen. You can also find my second channel on YouTube because now I have two channels. The second one is Quoth the Maven, and that is where I do my unscripted content, my videos about my vampire library and all the vampire stuff that people send to my vampire P.O. box. It's like having a evil petting zoo, like everything is vampire in my life. And also my vampire playthroughs of vampire video games are all on the Quoth the Maven second channel. So Vampire Reviews and Quoth the Maven. My book is The Company of Death by Elisa Hansen. It is a Death and the Maiden story where the Grim Reaper loses his powers during the zombie/vampire apocalypse. And he has to team up with Maiden to get them back in a country that is ravaged by vampires.
Fantastic. Oh my God, just a wealth of talent on this call. Guys, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for participating in this Vampire Symposium. Happy World Dracula Day to all of you and to all of you out there.
Thanks so much for having us.
Happy
Absolutely.
World Dracula Day.
Thank you. Happy Dracula Day.
Thank you.